Yes, you heard right. That's a new theme tune. New year, new theme tune for Cinema Eclectica. We, part of the Geek Show podcast network, we are, as ever, still the Geek Show's dedicated movie podcast. I remain Graham, and on this instance, I have been joined by Continuity Mick.
That's right. It's nice to know that you haven't been changed by your experiences in 4-panel.
Yes.
Well, not visibly anyway.
No. Audibly, you'd think I was still the same person, but yeah, that's positive.
It changes you on the inside, does 4-panel.
It really does. Yeah.
Did you get the therapy vouchers, by the way?
Yes, I was on 4-panel, listeners, discussing the Watchmen TV show, which was very foreign territory for me, as both someone who isn't normally on 4-panel and someone who can't normally be bothered about TV.
It was a double whammy for you, very much.
It was.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, but I enjoyed my holiday very much, and now I am back. And this week, our film of the week is Uncut Gems. Now, I know I've seen this, Mick, you haven't, right?
That's right. But that's because I was holidaying in a different dimension when suddenly I got drafted back.
You were,
for Cinema Eclectica. Yeah, so
Cinema Eclectica is in every way the Godfather Part 3 of podcasts. Just when you thought you were out, we pulled you back in.
That's right, yeah.
So,
yeah.
What, if anything, do you know about Uncut Gems?
I know it's got Adam Sandler in it, which is one of the many, many reasons why I wouldn't flock to it as a cinematic piece.
I feel like quite a lot of this is going to be spent justifying the decision to make this film of the week. So let me start off.
Well, I mean, I haven't looked too deeply into it. I just figured it was probably a fairly thin week for releases.
It wasn't actually. We could have done 1917, which is one of the Oscar frontrunners. But one of the main reasons why I was swayed by Uncut Gems was the tireless advocacy of Aidan, our co-host, who has had to take leave for family reasons, hence this podcast being a bit late. I know he is almost certainly listening to this, so Aidan, all the best to you. But I was also excited to see Uncut Gems. It's by the Safdie brothers, who made a very good film, which we did on the show a couple of years back, with another actor you probably wouldn't go to the cinema to see, Robert Pattinson.
Well, yes. I mean, as you know, with the way that my cinematic proclivities lie, I'm probably definitely going to be flocking to see a Robert Pattinson film in the not too distant future.
Big fan of The Lighthouse, I take it.
No.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and I can tell you that I am not best pleased about that casting decision. But
well, I mean, I think that Robert Pattinson has grown into a really excellent risk-taking actor, and if you wanted evidence of that, I think you could do a lot worse than watch Good Time, in which he is absolutely fantastic.
You see, my last experience of him was, what's it called? Cosmopolis?
Which is a masterpiece. Don't know what you're complaining about. I know it's hard work, but I love that film.
I mean, I've got a copy of Locke.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I haven't watched it yet. I've had it for a couple of years on Blu-ray. And I hesitate to watch it because I think it might be a sort of gritty Cosmopolis.
Wow, it's actually made you aversive to scenes of people in cars. That's something.
That's right. I'm just glad I got to see Holy Motors before I saw Cosmopolis.
Yes. But the thing is, with Uncut Gems, is that, I mean, I am not going to go to the wall defending Sandler like I would for Pattinson. I generally share your feelings on Sandler. But I think everyone, when you bring his name up, always says the same thing, which is, Yeah, he was great in Punch Drunk Love, though, wasn't he?
It's not a phrase I've ever used.
Have you seen
But
Punch Drunk Love?
No, which is why I wouldn't use the
Fair
phrase.
enough. That's a good reason for not using the phrase. But there is this common perception, even among those critics who are Sandler's most regular nemesis, that films like Punch Drunk Love prove that he can actually do good work when he puts his mind to it. And one of the reasons why Uncut Gems has picked up such buzz is that here Sandler is again once more teaming with some very unusual directors and putting the effort in.
Okay, I mean, I'm looking at the release poster, and it has to be said, it's not it's not crying out, "This is an Adam Sandler movie."
Yeah, it's black and white, it's minimalist, it shows him with like wads of tissue paper up his bleeding nose. Is that the one you're seeing?
That's the one, and you know, I'm almost surprised that this doesn't say based on an original play by Bertolt Brecht.
Well, it's good that you mentioned playwrights because Adam Sandler's character, Howard Ratner, is a very, very sort of tacky and corrupt New York City jeweler who is in monstrous amounts of debt. And one of the people he is in debt to is played by Eric Bogosian, the playwright who was responsible for Talk Radio, which Oliver Stone made into a film, and many other things. And I mean, Bogosian has a pretty good career as a character actor, but I think there is like a certain type of film that Eric Bogosian pops up in. And I'm sure for some of our listeners, as soon as I say Eric Bogosian's in it, they'll say, one of those. Bogosian's wheelhouse seems to be, I guess, a kind of arty scuzz.
Right.
I think that would be fair. Films that are unquestionably kind of art house, but also make you want to have a shower.
Yeah.
And that's very much the wheelhouse that Uncut Gems is in. Like Good Time, it is a film that feels like a continual panic attack. I mean, it's 2.25 hours, and barring a couple of scenes, there is one fantastic scene with Howard talking to one of his kids. Barring a couple of quieter scenes, it just never lets up. And in fact, the Safdie brothers have said that when they were working on it, Paul Thomas Anderson dropped by the editing suite to have a look, and they showed him like the first half of the film, and he just sat back and went, "That's incredible. Is it all like that?"
Yeah. I my interest was immediately piqued by the name of Adam Sandler's character, Howard Ratner, and then realised that it wasn't a biopic of Gerald Ratner, who was probably deemed in the world of jewelers probably deemed to be less than artful scuzz.
Yeah, he makes presumably his brother Howard look like a professional.
Yeah.
In fact, quite a lot of British critics have commented on this, and the Safdie brothers said they had never heard of Gerard Ratner when they did this, but they are very amused by this.
I mean, it is a fantastic happenstance if they genuinely hadn't heard of it.
It really is weird, isn't it? It's like just casually writing a story about a South American dictator and going, you say there was someone else with the same surname as my Jeff Pinochet?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite weird. Howard Ratner is reportedly based on stories that the Safdie brothers' father told them about his time as a jeweler, and some of the people who, let's say, didn't cope with it as well. And it begins with this extraordinary, almost psychedelic kind of trip through the interior of a diamond that I have no idea if it's computer generated, but it looks pleasingly analog. It looks like the sort of stuff Douglas Trumbull was coming up with in 2001. And at the end of this, it comes out in this weird kind of organic landscape, which turns out to be an image on a screen of Howard Ratner's colonoscopy. So the film literally begins up Adam Sandler's arse.
Well, that's odd, because usually that's where they end up.
I know.
I mean, it's clearly a departure for him.
Yes.
Let's all praise Adam's new approach.
his new rectum first path. But this is an early sign that Howard Ratner is falling to bits, and throughout the film, everything in his life is going to backfire. He has a relationship he has a very fractious relationship with his wife, who's played in another piece of Interestingly Against Typecasting by Idina Menzel, who in this film cannot let anything go. So it's a Frozen joke. Maybe it wasn't quite target audience.
I've seen Frozen once.
Fair enough.
I didn't take a huge amount of
attention to the casting.
Attention to the casting, because, like, you know, they weren't on screen.
I've been saying this a lot recently, but for some people, that joke will kill.
I know.
Much as it did the atmosphere here.
I'll tell you what. I'll find some canned laughter for the editor. It'll be hilarious in the edit. We'll make it funny in post.
God, how many times has Adam Sandler heard that? But yeah, his marriage is coming to bits. He's in debt to loads of people, some of which are played by New York playwrights who write arty scuzz. He has a younger mistress played by the real-life socialite Julia Fox, who seems to like him only maybe a fraction more than his wife. And in one extended club scene, he has to listen to and pretend to enjoy the music of The Weeknd, which I think is maybe the harshest test of his character that he goes through.
Yeah. But kudos, you know, it really shows Sandler's got some acting chops.
It does, yeah. And in all sincerity, yes, it does. There was a lot of speculation that this was going to get him an Oscar nomination, and it didn't. But I don't feel like that speculation was mad. I feel like instead I'm actually looking at the list of Oscar nominations and saying, where the hell is Adam Sandler on this?
Wow. You know you're having an odd week when you're thinking those thoughts.
I know. So it's a really powerful film. I think there is so far always this thing with Safdie brothers that stops me from fully loving their work. And I think it's only important to say that because some people already absolutely worship them. I can't get to that level yet, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. But I think they have a real talent for finding the absurd detail in a scene which just takes it to a different level. There is one of this film's many confrontation scenes. I mean, the whole film is basically a daisy chain of angry confrontations where the problems are exacerbated by the fact that Howard Ratner cannot actually get the door of his jeweller's open. And so all of this argument has to take place through a pane of glass, with him constantly shouting to his assistant, played by Lakeith Stanfield, who, once again, absolute kite mark of quality for a modern American film that man is, having to shout to his assistant to go and get the toolkit from the back. And it's just like, the content of the scene is dramatic enough, but the fact that he's also having this really mundane problem that just makes everything 10 times worse, it's just such a beautiful economical bit of writing, I think.
Okay.
And it has an awful lot of stuff like that. There's a very impressive sporting performance from Kevin Garnett, who I understand is a basketball player. I don't know because I don't care. But he's one of Sandler's customers, and he goes into extraordinary raptures about this rare gem that he's imported from Egypt, which makes you sort of in another film it might be a hint that this is about to go into a more supernatural zone, but it's impossible to imagine the Safdie brothers having any interest in the supernatural. It just increases your sense that everyone in this movie has been sent slightly mad by anxiety, and when you watch it you can't blame them.
Fair enough. So not a comedy then?
I mean, I do think parts of it are funny. I think that there is a scene of Sandler having to pass a briefcase in between two windows from the outside, which on the one hand is at a very tense moment of the film, but the fact that his way of dealing with it is just this really stupid, well, I'm going to lean out the window now kind of subterfuge is just... Even Howard Ratner has to have a better idea than this. It does give you that sense of like an Abel Ferrara film or one of the very early Scorsese's when he was working on a very limited budget, where you can sense that this is absolute street level New York, a much grimier, realer portrait of the city than you normally see. It reaffirms my decision to never go, to be honest.
So it's interesting you mentioned Scorsese because he's executive producer on this, isn't he?
He is, yeah. By all accounts, a pretty hands-off executive producer, which I think a lot of his recent executive producing work on things like this and the Farewell and the Souvenir have basically been, I have identified young directors I like, I want them to get their films made with the minimum of interference.
Plus, it allows him to concentrate all his efforts into getting his Oscar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In fact, maybe that's what sabotaged Sandler's Oscar campaign.
Exactly.
Yeah, we see you, Marcy. I think it has shown fruit in that compared to something like Good Time, or certainly compared to some of the Safdie's earlier films like The Pleasure of Being Robbed, which is an absolutely mad film that I do have a soft spot for. Someone gets attacked by a person in a polar bear costume. It's extraordinary.
Okay, hold on, because in an audio conversation,
yes,
that syntax is problematic. Do you mean that someone who is not wearing a polar bear outfit gets attacked by someone who is, or do you mean that someone gets attacked whilst wearing a polar? I mean, either is ludicrous.
It's been a year or two since I saw it, but my memory of it is that the person in the unconvincing polar bear suit is defo the aggressor.
Right. Okay. Okay.
But it's. I mean, the Safdies always include at least one thing that massively overreaches, and I kind of admire them for that. I like films that just are full of raggedy loose ends and swing for the fences.
Oh, well, I suggest you stay tuned for the off the shelf then.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, teaser time. But yeah, there is less of that stuff in this, partly because I think the Scorsese seal of approval has enabled them to do things on a bit of a bigger scale. I mean, there is cinematography by Darius Khondji, who has worked with Spielberg and all sorts of like huge blockbuster names. He was adamant that when he did film with the Safdies, he would be making a Safdie brothers film. He would not try and gloss them up. And he hasn't. But there are bits like this extraordinary prologue in an Ethiopian diamond mine, which feels like one of the flashbacks from The Exorcist. It's just staggering. And you think, well, they definitely couldn't have done that before.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, yeah, like not loved, and I think it would be nice to see it have some position on the Oscar list, which I think has. I mean, we should talk about this briefly because my feeling about the Oscars list is that it is not awful, but some of the things that aren't on it are really sticking in my throat.
Right.
I mean, late last year there seemed to be a wave of films that were mid-budget, not based on a pre-existing franchise, maybe in an unfashionable genre, but that had good casts, good directors, and it turned out people went to see them. And people have been complaining that we haven't got films like that for years. But late last year, we got Knives Out, we got Hustlers, we got Little Women, and it just annoyed me that those films were maybe less so Little Women, although I wish it had done a bit better. But they were not very well reflected in the nominations, I thought.
It has to be said that Little Women is one of those classics that doesn't get made often. It's not like Jane Austen, where there's a new adaptation of one of her books every sort of 6 weeks.
God, yeah. I think Little Women is one of those things like. This is going to sound like a bizarre comparison, but please stick with me. It's one of those things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? Now,
I see where you're going, but I concur with your assessment of your statement.
It's one of those things where every 20 years, once times have changed enough, you can make another version that'll mean different things to a different generation, and I like those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, quite intrigued by the best foreign language film category, if only because this is the second year in a row that this has featured a film that's also in the running for Best Picture, hinting at the delicious possibility that theoretically Parasite could win Best Picture, yet still somehow not be the best foreign language film.
Yeah.
It could happen. It won't happen, but it could happen.
It could.
So it's all a bit shambolic, really. I think a lot of the hopes that people were pinning on Parasite have kind of faded away. We'll be looking at Parasite next month when it comes out in the UK, listeners. I haven't seen it yet. I want to see it on the big screen because Bong Joon-ho's Netflix deal means that I could not do that with his last two films, and that disappointed me greatly.
I mean, is there an argument that possibly the Oscars are irrelevant now?
I mean, I'm always very aware that it's a stupid thing. I'm always very aware that when you look back at older Oscars and you compare the list of films that people remember and still watch from a particular year with the films that won Oscars, they never match up. But for me, this is the nearest thing I get to like the FA Cup or something. This is my couple of months where I can just become ridiculously partisan about wanting my team to win.
I've got it. I've got an idea.
Yeah.
How about when's your birthday, Graham?
18th May. Listeners, do send me presents, by the way. I've never had the opportunity to get my birthday in a show before, and now I've done it, I'm going to be shameless.
Well, spoiler alert, what I'm going to get you so that you can stop putting yourself through this Oscar nightmare every year, I'm going to get you a little photograph of Richard Ayoade holding aloft the FA Cup. And that can be your Oscar moment.
I bet he would look thrilled with that.
I think he would manage to attain just the right level of underwhelmment that would appeal to you. It's probably exactly the same look he would have if he got awarded an Oscar, to be fair.
To be fair, yeah, and part of me kind of wants people like that to get an Oscar. I mean, as you've heard last week, I had mixed feelings about Jojo Rabbit, but I kind of want it to win something, if only because a Taika Waititi Oscar speech is going to be amazing.
Yeah. Maybe when we get Love and Thunder.
Maybe, yes. The first Norse mythology-themed movie to win an Oscar. What a landmark that would be.
Yeah. Best runic screenplay.
Thanks for checking out one of the podcasts in our merry little family. We really do appreciate it. Podcasts aren't all we do. We also make strides into the world of video. If you like what you've heard and want more, then head on over to YouTube and search for The Geek Show. On our channel, we have video game and low-budget tech reviews, video game chatter in Press X, animation discussions in Keyframe, movie visual essays in Shortcuts, needlessly nerdy lists with Listomania, interviews from our travels, and much, much more. The future's bright, and who knows what else it holds, so don't forget to search for The Geek Show. Subscribe and click that notification bell to stay up to date.
So if you're enjoying what you're listening to, you can help us continue to create podcasts by going to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. We are on Facebook, just search for The Geek Show, and on Twitter at TGS_The Geek Show. Our website, thegeekshow.co.uk, also contains The Geek Shop, as well as exclusive articles and reviews of films that we don't cover on the show.
You do realise that the Geek Shop just sounds like we've misspelt The Geek Show.
It does, yeah. I think that's on brand, though. So yeah, if you do go to thegeekshow.co.uk, you can find my review of the early Ealing film, The Halfway House. You can find Mark Cunliffe's review of Being There, the classic Peter Sellers film. But for now, we're going to do something we haven't done for a while, which is Question of the Week.
A question of the week, you say?
A wild question of the week appears. And today's, it just couldn't be anything other than this. It's since me and Sarah reviewed our holiday viewing on last week's Cinema Eclectica, we want to know what your favourite film was that you watched over the period. And our answers include Mikey Toes said, I saw The Rise of Skywalker in 4DX on Christmas Eve, which was good fun. It's the end of an era of the greatest sci-fi saga on the big screen, and I wasn't disappointed by it. Happy viewing for 2020. Same to all of you listeners.
Well, that's a review that disagrees with at least 50% of the internet.
It's strange, because normally Star Wars discourse is driven by consensus. Hester Wells says Klaus on Netflix. Darkly humorous, gorgeous animation, due in part to the lighting technique. In tone, reminds me most of The Emperor's New Groove. Andrew Young says, I watched Paddington 2 for the first time on Boxing Day. Absolutely delightful. Just a warm, cosy blanket of a film. It is so great, isn't it?
I'm going to put my hand up here and say I haven't jumped on the Paddington bandwagon.
Right, well, they're both on iPlayer as far as I know, so you know how to remedy that.
I know. For me,
yep.
It's a childhood memory thing, right?
Yeah.
I have very fond memories of coming home from school at tea time and seeing cardboard cutout humans interact with a stuffed bear covered in marmalade sandwich, right?
Yeah.
And that is Paddington to me.
You will be delighted to hear that the second film contains a direct homage to this exact animation technique very early on.
Okay. It's just I don't want to spoil that sort of childhood imagery, you see.
Well, I mean, I can't tell you how to cope with your own childhood. I've been waiting long enough for people to tell me how to do that.
Yeah, I hear you.
But I do think the Paddington films are wonderful, and as someone who also watched Paddington as a kid, they were nothing but respectful to the spirit of the original.
Well, in that case, I may give them a try. I have grandchildren now. Maybe it's an afternoon I can spend with them.
That would be a good bonding experience. Also, Hugh Grant's performance in the second one is, I mean, if you want to pinpoint the moment that we all just went, oh yeah, Hugh Grant's a national treasure, isn't he? That's the point.
Not that point in that car in America a few years ago. That's not the bit that makes him a national treasure.
No. Although, that was probably not the worst thing he did in the 90s.
Well, probably not.
Some other answers we got. Mark Cunliffe, who we mentioned earlier, is one of our on-site reviewers, said Blinded by the Light by Gurinder Chadha, which I also saw over Christmas, and I enjoyed a lot more than I was expecting to. And finally, from Twitter, Andy Reeve says, Jingle all the way for me, put that cookie down now. It's a line from the film, but I was actually eating a cookie when I read that, and I felt called out. And Rob Simpson, formerly of this parish, says Knives Out was great, and I rewatched Zootopia, which I stand by as one of the best animated films Disney has ever produced.
Okay.
So, over to us.
Yeah.
Was there anything that particularly stood out for you over Christmas and New Year, Mick?
No, well, unfortunately, because I recently reacquainted myself with the world of 4K video gaming, I got trapped in a space opera adventure game for most of the thing. But I did over Christmas make one of my sojourns down to visit family, and experienced Detective Pikachu, which was my first exposure to said movie, and also to the world of Pokemon.
Right.
And I have to say, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a thinly veiled, family-friendly Deadpool 3. And this was the thing about it. It was quite clearly a family movie, and it has got a heartwarming, sort of almost Goonie-style main plot running through it.
Mm.
But the sass that the Pikachu displays throughout is just 100. It wouldn't have worked with anyone other than Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah,
delivering those lines. It's like if Deadpool made a kids movie, what would it be like?
Interesting.
Yeah, and I liked it. My favourite scene in Detective Pikachu is where they try to interrogate a Mr. Mime Pokemon,
right,
by miming setting light to the room that he's in.
Okay, that's pretty terrific.
For that scene alone, Detective Pikachu deserves an Oscar. Best mimed movie scene.
Yes.
It should get.
For me, I watched a film on Mubi by a director, a very sort of acclaimed, very canonical, classic director who I've always had trouble getting into. I watched Picnic on the Grass by Jean Renoir, which is one of his later films, and I found it really bizarrely endearing. I think I gave it a chance despite not having really enjoyed the sort of stuff by Renoir that always gets listed in lists of the greatest movies ever made. But I just watched it because the plot synopsis sounded mental, which is a perfectly good reason to watch something sometimes.
But, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the reason to watch something sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, this has a synopsis that sounds like it was created by transcribing one of Jacob Rees-Mogg's fever dreams. It's set.
You see, I must pull you up on that misconception. Because in order to have dreams, you would require an imagination, young man. And I doubt that Mr. Rees-Mogg has something so frivolous.
Very true.
I thank you.
Yes, fair point. But it is set in a future United States of Europe whose president, or at least the person who's running for president, is such a technocrat that he believes that people should no longer reproduce biologically and should trust everything to a mass artificial insemination program.
It's not Johnson, then.
It is so weird watching this film now because everything in it opens itself up to a Brexit joke. But the weird thing about it is that doesn't harm it. That somehow, despite having set up this kind of weird Aldous Huxley premise, it then becomes a very charming romantic comedy where he goes off to the countryside with some friends and meets a peasant girl and realizes that actually non-mechanical sex isn't as bad as we all thought it was. And I just found it really endearing. It has massive overtones of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It has someone who appears to be able to control weather by playing the flute. And I watched it and thought, yeah, I actually wish the rules of the game was a bit more like this.
I actually think that was one of Boris's chat-up lines as well.
I can control the weather with my flute.
No. Although now you say that
it does
in that
sound
context.
A bit, yeah.
No, I was thinking, you see, non-mechanical sex is...
Yes. So, shall we move on to Off the Shelf?
Yes, let's.
Because this sounds... I must admit, I have watched this film before, but it was while I was in a very bad mood at Nicholas Winding Refn's streaming service, which it was on. I feel like I missed quite a lot, so please talk to us about Night Tide.
Okay, so Night Tide has many, many things to mention. The strangest is a quite subdued performance by Dennis Hopper.
It's true.
I mean, even within the context of playing a US Navy rating, it's subdued because he goes on shore leave in this tiny, sleepy sort of coastal village.
Yeah.
And it's not your usual Hollywood portrayal of naval ratings on leave. He goes and has a quiet pint in a jazz club.
Yeah.
Because even the jazz is quite quiet in there. He doesn't go carousing. He doesn't go gambling and getting in fights. He just goes into the bar, gets himself a drink, sits next to the band, listens to the music, sees the drop-dead gorgeous girl, escorts her home in a gentlemanly fashion, doesn't get invited in, and goes home.
Right.
So it's a subdued naval rating.
Yeah.
Played by a subdued Dennis Hopper.
When you put it like that, it is quite mind-blowing, isn't it?
It is. It's like, it's Dennis Hopper, for crying out loud. You are expected at some point during this hour and 40 minutes or thereabouts, that he's going to go batshit crazy at someone.
Yes. Yeah.
And he doesn't. Which is almost more of a surprise.
And it's particularly noteworthy since the film itself is picking up the craziness slack quite effectively, I remember.
Yeah, well, the way, and I think I mentioned this to you when we were talking about me doing this for the show. It's like Dennis Hopper wakes up in a kind of American coastal Royston Vasey.
Yes, you did mention that.
With a guest appearance by Harry Enfield, who plays a sort of British retired sea captain. It's not actually Harry Enfield, it's Gavin Muir, but it's the way he plays it, it's like a Harry Enfield character.
Right.
He's so British.
Terribly British.
Terribly British. He verges from scene to scene on almost becoming Tory boy. There's a tarot card reader who works on the pier.
Right.
Who, when she first meets Johnny Drake, complains about tea bags as an invention because it makes it very difficult for her to read the tea leaves.
That's a fair point.
But she would never read her own tea leaves because as a fortune teller, she would never do that because she can't. She can only read the fortunes of others, not her own.
That really deflates the job about how a psychic going out of business should have seen it coming.
Exactly. The point is, later in the film, Johnny goes to see said card reader.
Yeah.
And says he's never been to a fortune teller before. And oh boy, does she take umbrage at him calling her a fortune teller. Even though she introduced herself to him as a fortune teller.
Right. Is it one of those things where they can say it because it's like a reclaimed slur? But
I think it's the charlatan's version of the N-word. It's there's a guy who runs a merry-go-round.
Yeah.
Who lets Johnny have a look at the horses because they are magnificent specimens of hand-carved merry-go-round horses.
Right.
Who has a young lady with him who is obviously smitten with Johnny Drake. Who he introduces her as his granddaughter, but at a couple of points throughout the film, she refers to him as father.
Right.
I mean, it's obviously quite an insular coastal town.
Yeah, we're back to Royston Vasey again, aren't we?
But anyway, I'm digressing. It's a bizarre setup, the place, and the problem is that Curtis Harrington, who wrote and directed the piece, has a reputation for the macabre sort of horror thriller genre.
Yeah,
and this is clearly quite an early example of his work, because to say it lacks polish is an understatement. There's a couple of pan shots and tilt shots where there is definitely 3 stages to that movement.
Right.
Yeah. Where the camera sort of jerks. And the world building falls down. There are noticeable gaps in the world building. But the synopsis is basically that Johnny Drake spends some leisure time in San Diego at this little coastal town where there's a pier. And he meets this girl, Maura, played by Linda Lawson, in the jazz club. She gets approached by this sinister-looking old woman, who talks to her in a strange language before disappearing off. And this is what makes Johnny feel protective to this Maura, because she's obviously quite shaken by what's said.
Yeah.
It then transpires that in the last couple of years, Maura's had 2 boyfriends who've both gone missing and shortly thereafter turned up dead.
Right.
And there are no clues. I mean, one of the worst acting performances I've ever seen is during the visit from the police chief, Henderson.
Yes.
You know, I've seen sort of like year 9 drama groups give more convincing performances than this guy. But anyway, he comes along and says, "No, there are no clues yet. Thanks, bye." And that seemingly is just to introduce the concept of these 2 dead bodies.
Right.
There are rumours that Maura may be a sea person, a mermaid, if you will. And certainly this is strengthened by the fact that she's a sideshow on the amusement pier.
Yeah.
And appears to the public for 25 cents in a tank wearing a fake mermaid tail.
Right.
But Johnny doesn't care about all the rumours. Johnny dismisses all this mermaid talk because it's crazy, right?
I mean, I'm not gonna, be prejudicial about it, but yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And so he pursues a relationship with Maura. And this is, again, another thing where it's unclear, because he keeps returning to town, but it's not clear whether this action takes place over a weekend or a week or several months, and he keeps revisiting.
Yeah.
All you know is that he gets off the bus in town, and you don't know whether he's based just up the road, so it's handy for him, or whether he's, just returning there on a sort of monthly basis whenever he gets 48-hour shore leave or whatever.
Mm.
So again, it's a bit erratic. Anyway, the plot thickens when one day Johnny goes to visit Maura in her flat, and she's in the bath.
Yeah.
He's feeling very tired, so she suggests that he lies down while she finishes her ablutions. And he does, and he starts to doze off, as you would if you were tired.
Yeah.
He looks up and he sees Maura get out of the bathroom and walk towards him in nothing but a dressing gown. And this is 1961, Graham.
So that's quite spicy then.
I mean, this is quite raunchy.
Yes.
And she sits down next to him on the sort of sofa that he's lying on. And she leans in and they start to kiss. And we pull in and we're in close up. And then he looks down and we glance down to the curled up tail next to his head.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. And then in quite the clumsiest crossfade I've ever seen, it turns out it is not Maura and her fish-shaped feet that are kissing him, but instead he is in the strangular hold of an octopus.
I mean,
in some kind of psychosexual octopus fantasy scene.
Like I say, I've seen this, and I'm you're describing it to me, and I'm wondering whether anything happened, whether this is real. Did I dream this? What's happening?
Well, that's very much what Johnny Drake does. He thinks, am I dreaming this? And promptly wakes up and discovers that yes, he is. I mean, it's not a lengthy scene. It's maybe 2 minutes from her leaving the bathroom to him fondling an octopus. You know, when you go on a podcast and you think, I'm using phrases that shouldn't exist in the English language.
Yes. I recently watched Andrei Zolowski's film Possession, so this is... Why is weird octopus sex following me around all of a sudden? What's happening?
Well, I think it says more about you than anything else. And I like the way that you use the phrase weird octopus sex.
Yeah.
Like there's a kind of octopus sex that's perfectly normal.
Look, if it's done between a loving man and an octopus in a committed relationship.
Oh, dear. So anyway, when Johnny wakes up from his psychosexual octopus fantasy,
yes,
he wakes up to discover that the bathroom door is open. There are wet footprints leading away from it, but not towards where he is, leading out of the apartment. And so he follows them.
Right.
And they lead to the beach. And it turns out that because it's a full moon and the tide is at its highest, the pull of the sea for a sea person is at its strongest. And she's been sleepwalking down to the beach.
Right.
So he finds her, he rescues her, he takes her back to the flat. And he ministers to her tenderly to make sure that she's all right.
Mm-hmm.
And when she recovers, she suggests that they go on a diving trip. And he thinks it's not a particularly good idea. And after a brief but concentrated attempt to dissuade her from going, he agrees. And they go out on this dive, and we get some quite nice shots, really, of them diving and sort of looking at things on the bottom of the seabed. And as Johnny's sort of looking at some stuff in a sort of sandbank, she sneaks up behind him with a knife and cuts his air hose, forcing him to surface.
Right.
And she just swims off into the depths of the sea. And Johnny just eventually returns to shore wearing nothing but a hoodie, reaches the stand where the captain is doing his spiel about the mermaid, covers his face, disguises himself, buys a ticket and peers into the tank, only to see her now dead in the tank with lifeless eyes staring upward.
Much like a
And
shark's.
Yes. Momentarily, Captain Murdoch appears, brandishing a gun. It becomes apparent that Moira's former boyfriends also found Captain Murdoch brandishing some kind of weapon and fell to his almost jealous rage. And this is where it kind of is let down. It's got a Scooby-Doo ending.
Yeah.
And it's like, really? You told this story about she was a mer person just so that she wouldn't get a boyfriend when she grew up? What? And she believed it. And the rest of the town believed it.
Got to admit, it's pushy parenting at its worst, isn't it?
It is. And it's one of those films that's disappointing because it could be so much more.
Yeah.
You're left at the end wondering who the hell the sinister old woman is.
Right, yeah.
Either she's a sea person, and it's not a myth that he's made up, or she's not a sea person, and he's just a random old woman who's got a far more interesting backstory than anybody in this little piece.
Well, it's funny you should say that.
Oh.
Because the woman is played by Marjorie Cameron, who it turns out does have a far more interesting backstory than anyone in this piece. Marjorie Cameron was the wife of Jack Parsons, the rocket scientist and occultist, and a close personal friend of Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey. Some years before she starred in Night Tide, normally when you give backstory to an actor, you have to talk about how, maybe they were working, on a building site, or maybe they were doing something else. A few years before Night Tide, Marjorie Cameron was trying to perform a series of sex magic rituals that would give birth to a race of children that she called moon children and would be devoted to the worship of Horus.
You see, it's already a better story.
I know!
And also, of a special pleasure to us, a sequel to The Pyramids of Mars.
Yes. But if you've ever wondered why NASA aren't doing as amazing things as they used to, that is it. They don't have enough occultists on staff. When they were staffed by mad occultists doing sex magic rituals, they got us to the moon.
Imagine what they'd need for us to get to Mars.
It doesn't bear thinking about.
It really doesn't.
Dennis Hopper's probably had nightmares about it.
It's probably what's driven him to some of his later performances.
Yes.
Actually, this is it. This is what broke Dennis Hopper.
Maybe.
I mean, for someone who was born in 1922, using a mononym was quite a brave move, wasn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Because when we was talking, when you mentioned that she was played by Marjorie Cameron, I was thinking, because when I watched when I started watching the film, and obviously because it's a 1960s film, you get all the stars listed at the beginning. It just has Cameron listed. And I thought, oh, Cameron must be playing the part of, I don't know, Rover, the chirpy little dog that runs into the sea at the first drop of a hat.
No way to talk about our former Prime Minister, but carry on. Wouldn't be an octopus in the nightmare if it was him.
No. Yeah. So yeah, that's a better story.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a magnificent restoration. That's got to go without saying. It feels like the lower end of the quality threshold of a Twilight Zone episode rather than a feature film.
Yeah.
In terms of the presentation on this re-release, there's an episode of a horror appreciation show called Sinister Image, which, as a left-handed person, I take exception to.
Good title, though.
And that sort of is a review of Curtis Harrington's oeuvre. And there's also a slightly shorter documentary called Harrington on Harrington. And then there's a picture gallery. So it's a bit sparse on extras, but, you know, you get a good hour and a half of Curtis Harrington talking about himself. So
Yeah.
that's nice.
That's fair enough.
But yeah, is it a film I'd recommend? Not necessarily. It's got some interesting concepts in, but they've most of them been explored more thoroughly and more competently elsewhere.
Yeah.
I would mark it down as a curio that's worth a visit if you're a Dennis Hopper completist. Are there any of those?
I mean, there's a lot to be complete about.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I say, I saw it. I thought maybe I should give it another chance, and maybe one day I will. The presence of Marjorie Cameron is so fascinating, even if I don't really think the film worked that well.
Yeah. I must like I said, she was the most interesting character in it.
Yeah.
If only because you never found out what she was.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And what you do find out what she is, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
On to another film. I just want to note very quickly, there's this film called Phoenix that has come out on Verve Pictures just this week, which is directed by, I'm not sure if it's first-time director or just someone who's very early in her career, but she's named Camilla Strom Henriksen, which I think is a superb name. Should be very proud of that. This is the kind of drama that I like to watch in January when Christmas and New Year have come and gone and the cinema is still full of the year's festive releases. And sometimes you just want to watch something little and indie sized that's kind of depressing but also kind of hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just me. But that is where films like Phoenix come in. It is a very contained, controlled film. It's about one family, and it sticks to being about one family. And it's particularly focused on the children, Jill and Bo, who live with their mother Astrid, an artist with a history of mental health problems. Their father, Nils, is estranged from them. He has a remarkably busy career as a jazz trumpeter, which apparently takes him all over the world. And it does make me wonder is that a thing that happens in Norway? Is the jazz scene much bigger over there than here? Because
I can't comment on that. I have been to Norway.
Right.
But unfortunately, due to a misunderstanding of the scheduling of the DFDS ferry, when we got there, Norway was shut.
Right. So much for that.
And didn't open until about half an hour after we left.
It's terrible when you find a place that still has Sunday trading hours.
And this was on a Wednesday. The thing is, I can tell you that they have some very hospitable newsagents.
That's nice. We don't get to see many of those in this film.
Maybe that's a niche I can exploit.
That's something.
Someone needs to start a film movement that reveals to the world the friendly and open nature of your humble Norwegian newsagent.
Newsagent wave. That's what you'd call it.
Yes. I'd stick to the frozen stuff if I were you.
But yes, so Phoenix has this plot twist about half an hour in, which I am going to reveal because I think it's hard to talk about the film without it. And also because it happens half an hour in, and the majority of the film is based around, dealing with it. But about half an hour in, Astrid commits suicide, and Jill, the eldest child, who's already been set up as being kind of a surrogate mother for her little brother anyway, makes the decision to keep it secret. And it's been a very closed off, intimate film so far. It has a lot of close ups, a lot of scenes take place in the shadows, and you were prepared for this twist to take it into the realm of something truly ominous. And yet it doesn't happen. It maintains a kind of sensitivity that I think is really admirable. It never puts a foot wrong with the characters. It has a lead performance as Jill by a young actress called Ylva Björkestedin, who I think is just extraordinary in this, and she is good at a kind of close-up acting. Every time the film goes in for a close-up, you are almost excited to see what she's going to bring to that next. The overall tone reminded me a bit of a big favourite director of ours on this show, Hirokazu Koreeda, in particular his films about children like Shoplifters, I Wish, and in particular Nobody Knows, which is about a very similar kind of insular situation of children trying to make it on their own without adult supervision. Like Koreeda's films, I think it tackles very dark material with great sensitivity. I think it has fantastic performances from the young cast. I think one thing that is really interesting about Strom Henriksen's handling of this material is there are moments where she goes for a scene that pushes out to the edges of what the film can be. There are some fantasy sequences which almost go into horror territory. There is a sort of extended musical break where we see Nils at one of his concerts. And all of these feel like certainly a kind of interesting distraction from the insularity and the darkness of the central situation, but they don't feel like they break engagement with the film. They don't stick out. They're just a director knowing when the audience needs something a bit different, but not overstepping the mark so it takes you out of the film. I think it's a really, really promising film, and I'm very excited to see what Henriksen does next. And that's Phoenix by Camilla Strom Henriksen, which is out now on Blu-ray and DVD from Verve Pictures. So, there's a lot of big releases next week, and I want to start just by talking about a couple of documentaries because they always get lost in the shuffle. But I think there are a couple of documentaries out that are really worth some attention. There's Midnight Traveller by Hassan Fazili, a story of migration told from and indeed by a migrant's perspective, which has got some really positive reviews so far. There's Be Natural, the untold story of Alice Guy Blanche. Alice Guy Blanche, in case you don't know, was the first female film director in history. She made silent shorts in the 1900s, and I'm really happy to see that story getting a bit more attention because some of them are absolutely terrific. In terms of the bigger releases, there's Bombshell, in which Hollywood finds a way to tell us the only story about sexual harassment where you can't actually sympathise with the women. So well done there. That's the story of the sexual harassment scandal that nearly but tragically didn't bring down Fox News. With Charlize Theron, Nicole Kidman, Margot Robbie, John Lithgow, Kate McKinnon, and in a piece of casting that does admittedly kind of make me want to go and see it, Malcolm McDowell as Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah. That is genius.
Yes. I know.
Oh, I want to go. I mean, I was tempted anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, normally I'm not a huge Kidman fan, but having seen her as Action Kidman in Aquaman last year,
Of course, yeah.
I think that's going to be interesting with Harley Quinn and Atomic Blonde.
Yes,
I mean, that's the Charlie's Angels remake right there.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's not as diverse as they wanted, because you look at the poster and it does look like a spot the difference competition.
It does.
But Fox News had a type.
Yeah. So yeah, Malcolm McDowell was excellent.
Elsewhere, there's a couple of Belgian directors whose names that I can't remember, and I'm not particularly going to look up, because they are taking the baton of the Bad Boys franchise from Michael Bay in Bad Boys for Life, which I just think will be terrible. There's Terrence Malick has returned with A Hidden Life, his latest attempt to answer the question, what is the Terrence Malickiest film you can possibly make?
Okay.
This has August Deal and the late Bruno Ganz in a film about resistance to the Nazis in wartime Austria. We've got Just Mercy by Destin Daniel Cretton, who's still probably most celebrated short term 12. This has kind of a bland trailer, but I gotta say, it's got a pretty great cast. Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, Brie Larson, Tim Blake Nelson, and Rafe Spall. That's not bad.
No.
And we've got Trey Edward Schultz's new film Waves with Calvin Harrison Jr., who I was reviewing with you actually on the show last year for his lead role in Loose. So
you have to remember, I'm an old man and I have no memory.
Well, fair enough. But he's good, Calvin Harrison Jr. I think he's going to be a pretty big star in the future. But there's quite a lot of stuff there, and I don't think any of it really sort of tipped over into being something where we thought, yes, definitely build a show around that. So next week we're having a director's lottery, and I believe you have the randomizer right there.
I have the randomizer if you have the drum roll.
Oh boy. Hold on, I'll just learn to drum.
Okay. We can wait, we've got time.
We don't have time. We never have enough time.
Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
The number you require is 2, 4, 3.
Oh, so that's some way on. 2, 4, 3. Oh, nice. 2, 4, 3. There are some weeks when we do the randomizer and we think, oh God, what are we going to do? Or who the hell is that? This is not one of those weeks. 2, 4, 3 is Catherine Bigelow.
Oh.
So that's good. I have wavered a bit in my Bigelow fandom over the years. I find some of the new shaky cam war stuff that she does a bit tiring, but I am a huge fan of early Bigelow. I'm not going to say exactly what we're doing next. I will have to run it past Tim, but I'm very excited.
Well, let me just have a look. Oh yeah, I see what you mean about the shaky. Yeah.
It got a bit like that, yeah. I remember sitting in the theatre watching Zero Dark 30 and thinking, I'm pretty sure the actual hunt for Osama bin Laden didn't last as long as this.
Yeah. Could I do the Selling Jesus music video she did for Skunker Dancy?
Because that song's at the end of Strange Days, which is, I think, her best film and an absolute masterpiece.
Right, screw what Tim thinks. Let's do Strange Days then.
I also think Tim hates Strange Days, so that might be a tough sell.
It's a double whammy.
Yes. I don't know. I think a whole podcast of us arguing about Strange Days could be compelling listening in some ways.
I may be called out of retirement yet again.
But yes, we'll decide on that later and make it clear on social media what we're doing. But until then, that's been your lot from Cinema Eclectica. I've been Graham.
And I've been Mick.
And we'll see you next week.